in my heady days, as I like to call them, I really prefer in a social setting, I preferred, I should use the past tense, joints or pre-rolls. But if it was me, myself, and I, and a deep dark forest or a beach or just hanging out in my own place, I like the bong. I felt that I got a different head high from each one, much more so than a pipe. I'm wondering if those are temperature variant possibilities. Who knows?
Yes.
But I want to ask you a question and preface it with I've been doing some educating on synergy and plant synergies because I think that a lot of people in the cannabis world don't, there are things that would be helpful for more people to understand. Do you see plant synergy as a thing? And if so, how do you see that as playing out in either what you guys are doing at Real Isolates or just in the cannabis world in general?
Yes, I definitely do see it as a thing. And I think it's extremely important for a bunch of different reasons, namely that this subject that we're focused on has been largely ignored. And if a large majority of the money alone, if we just look at that for one sec, is being made on smokable, inhalable material, and we don't really know what anybody is consuming. I mean, we kind of do. There's been some studies on it, but not a lot. That's important by itself. And there are crazy complex mixtures in the smoke of these materials that have not been well understood or well studied. So I think at a minimum, it's important and a thing because it needs to be looked at more seriously. For instance, CBD and THC. We do know that CBD modulates the effects of THC, and we do know that it changes the way that it's, received by the receptors. That's important, right? Because my understanding is that small changes in pharmacology can create, or excuse me, small changes in molecules and the way they interact can create big changes in pharmacology. That's my general knowledge and consensus of this. You can correct me if I'm way off base here, but you know, that's why I
I,
think this is important.
I think it's very important. And for example, just more clarification on that. Typically, we we forget that CBD is landing on an inactive part of the TH1 receptor, sorry, CB1 receptor, on the inactive part, not the part that makes the downstream chemical cascade that leads to a psychedelic or a psychoactive effect. But what it does when it lands on that particular location is it changes the conformation of the receptor slightly so the THC is interacting with it differently. And we also know that other terpenes can be affecting cannabinoid receptors such as beta-caryophyllene and others. So the change of one thing can create a dramatic effect. That could be a change in temperature. It could be a change in shelf life of the product. It's fascinatingly complex and extremely fuzzy, but we can draw some basic conclusions. For example, we know that whole plant cannabis in laboratory animals leaves spasticity, muscle spasticity, as similar to what happens in multiple sclerosis MS than the isolates. So we know that the whole plant is working differently. And there's two terms that I discuss, therapeutic or clinical synergy versus pharmacologic synergy. And pharmacologically, we have too many things going on to know exactly what is doing what, but clinically, we can definitely measure effects and we can also compare them with known synthetic reference drugs. So there's a lot that we know and that we can know. But this other piece, I think, is going to really be relying on artificial intelligence, network dynamics, and the computer in many ways. And AI is going to be the microscope of the future in terms of understanding all of these. And we are at the tip. So I give you guys a shout out to really being pioneers in this. Do you
Well, thank you.
have do you have other favorite classifications of molecules?
Well, this is probably not a popular one to talk about, but the potential harmful things, right? I've had a lot of people ask
Absolutely.
us. I've had a lot of people ask us, and this goes hand in hand with what we're just talking about you know the potential interactions and the synergies and what's causing what, and will we ever know because it's super complex, and it is. Right down to we know to some extent based on the literature, there's about 2,600 plus compounds in cannabis smoke. I suspect there's probably more that we just haven't really discovered yet or even identified. But, you know, a lot of people have asked, well, so, are the bad things contributing to the effects? And I want to say this very generally and vaguely because, again, I don't know everything about this subject. I only know what I'm doing here in our lab and how we capture these things. We rely on other people to tell us more about what's actually going on. But my thought is, for instance, so this is a tough one. Terpenes, right? Terpenes are extremely important and they're amazing, and they do drive a lot of the subjective effects in general of the cannabis experience, especially when smoking. But my thought with terpenes is this: there is some evidence that terpenes specifically, even at pretty low temperatures, can transform into bad things,
Oh,
namely,
yeah.
isoprene and benzene and I can never pronounce the other one. It starts with an M. More clean. Is it more clean here? Let me type it in. But regardless, there are some transformations at a fairly low temperature, and this has not been well studied or well documented. But myrcene, for example, it's very abundant in cannabis. It's very popular. We know a little bit about it, right? We know that it can be relaxing. We know it's found in other plants and
Yeah.
other herbs and spices. Myrcene at a fairly low temperature will transform into benzene. Benzene toxicity is essentially like lethargic, relaxed, sleepy. Those are similar symptoms or side effects that
Um,
people would expect to see from smoking myrcene heavy strains. And, this isn't to point out to say, oh, that's bad, don't do that. These are just things that I'm reading. But my thought is, there is potential that in this case, right, maybe it's not just myrcene that's making you feel relaxed. Maybe it's also a little bit of benzene that you're inhaling and consuming. That's possible. I'm, not here to whistle blow. That's not what we do. But this is the stuff that we have to read about to be prepared to either learn about or overcome with other potential benefits. Because I always see the smoking as a net benefit, not just something that's potentially harmful. That's the way we look at it. But that's something, right? People have asked again, are the bad things causing some of the effects that might even be desirable? And my thought is, could be. Yeah, could be. I'm not going to say for certain, but the evidence is potentially there. Limonene also has been documented as turning into benzene at temperatures between vaporizing and smoking. Another one of my
oh,
favorite
wow.
terpenes, by the way. Um, More and how awesome and interesting they are. Beta-caryophyllene, right? You mentioned that before. We did some research on roaches. We analyzed roaches from a big public consumption event. We had a couple hundred roaches. We analyzed the roach, and then we smoked the roaches with our method to see how things changed. And what we found was in the roaches, there was a huge accumulation of beta-caryophyllene. And the point of this research was to see to see why roaches might feel different compared to the original joint that you rolled. And one of the big takeaways was that there is an abundance of beta-caryophyllene in a roach. And is that contributing to your effect that you get from that? So I think terpenes are huge, and we don't know a ton about them yet as far as like what happens when we smoke them. My other thought here on the terpenes, if I can rant about them for a second, because I love
Yes.
a delicious smoke just like most, right? But my thought is this: you get a joint, you roll it up, and everybody likes to take a couple of pulls on it before you light it up, and it smells and tastes so good right there. When you spark it up, quick tidbit about a joint: it's the most chemically diverse way that you can smoke. So before, when you mentioned the difference between smoking a joint or smoking a bong, there is definitely parameters that would change the chemistry and that would make you feel potentially different even with the same exact strain or input material. But the joint is the most chemically diverse smoke. You get this hot ember on the end that's transforming big time. Then you've got hot air that's less and less hot towards the mouthpiece, that's in some forms vaporizing things right behind the joint, but right behind the ember, and in other ways decarboxylating and accumulating things like beta-caryophyllene down towards the tip. So the joint is changing as you smoke it, and actually the chemistry is changing as well. That's really cool. My thought is this, right? If we know that the terpenes can disappear, at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and we know others are going to degrade really easily because we have to, we all talk about storage conditions and how to properly treat your cannabis post harvest to not lose terpenes and such. I think we're getting a little bit of that aromatherapy when we're breathing in on a joint because the stuff down towards the mouthpiece is not burning and it's not decarbing or transforming yet. But then once you get down towards the end, it doesn't taste the same anymore and it doesn't feel the same anymore. You put it out and spark it back up, it feels different.